Welcome to this episode of Locked In. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to do this custom splatter paint job in less than 3 hours. So if you want to find out more, stay tuned. So I'm going to give this a little bit of a preface of the situation that I had and what I did and why, so that you can understand kind of the full overview of what I want to cover in this video. This is not going to be a full painting tutorial breakdown. I'm just going to describe the steps that I took. I do have a how to paint your bike video that's been on this channel for a long time that goes over a little bit more in detail. And this was done in a paint booth, but essentially what I did can be replicated at home with rattle cans as well. So don't think that you need a spray gun and booth to do this. So what I started with is my stock Giant TCX. I wanted to repaint it for Grinduro to kind of match my new bag system that I was getting from Kai Ventures, and I have a review of that as well on the channel. So I wanted to just go crazy and do a paint job that I've never attempted before. And I didn't want to affect my whole setup on my bike, so I didn't actually strip it all the way down. This can have mixed effects, so take that with a grain of salt. You might want to tear yours down a little bit more, but you don't necessarily have to if you take my following advice. So what I initially did was I removed the wheels off the bike, I removed the brake calipers, as well as the crankset. I masked up all the important bits, which essentially was the stem and handlebars. I actually wanted to paint the top cap. Then I masked up the rear brake hose and caliper for the rear of the bike. And I have even left the derailleur on there, again, wrapping that and masking it well. This is where you really want to take your time masking it, especially if you're going to leave things connected, because you're going to be having to fight around things. Now, ideally, yes, you would break this down to the frame, and you can still watch this video. If you do that, it does make it a lot easier. I'm just trying to help you do it. If you don't have the tools to do it yourself, you can actually make a pretty decent paint job without having to fully disassemble the bike. Then, since this paint job was essentially in good shape, it did have minor scuffs on it from racing it and riding it for the past year or so. So all I really did, because it didn't have any major gouges that were needed to be filled, is I went over it with a gray Scotch-Brite with it on the entire frame, basically to dull it out evenly. Now, if you do have deep cuts or gouges in your frame, those are going to be seen with a new layer of paint. The good thing about this paint job is it's so ornate that it kind of masks any little scratches or imperfections in the paint that I had, so I wasn't super concerned with that. But if you want a flawless paint job, that's where you might need to go in with some filler to potentially level out those deep imperfections in the frame. So once you have that done and your frame is basically masked off and fully rubbed down smoothly, you want to go over the frame with your hands and feel and make sure that the texture feels the same. Then what is really important to get a good paint job is cleaning. So you want to use a alcohol-based solvent to wipe it down, making sure not to touch it with your hands since the oil on your hands isn't good to have on there. You basically want a clean surface. Ideally, you want to shoot this in a somewhat clean area. If you are spray painting outside, try to wet down the floor with water if needed so it keeps the dust down. Obviously, bugs and other things can get in the paint, which does suck, but again, I'm trying to do this in a couple of hours. Then you want to spray your base coat. I used a black base coat. Now, in the footage that you're watching, you're going to see a spray gun. Again, you can do this with a rattle can. It's actually probably a little bit easier in some of the areas because the rattle can is a lot smaller than the gun, so it's going to be easier to get in those hard to reach places, especially if you have cables still running on your bike. But again, if you masked well, you're going to be able to get around this. Painting this on a bike stand or something similar to it, or hanging it like I did in this video, is going to be the best way to do it so you can get around the bike and walk around it. So after you spray your base, I did 2 coats of black. You want to make sure to let that fully cure and then wipe down again the frame again to make sure there's no other particulates or anything else in the paint. If you do have any bugs or anything that got stuck in there, you could sand it down, wipe it clean again, and then touch up those areas if needed. After that, you want to take your splatter color of choice or colors, like in my scenario, and you again can get this with a rattle can and spray basically the paint into a cup or something like that. And then I just took a small brush, an individual one for each different color, and just flicked it as hard as I could to get a different effect. I would basically mix how much paint I'd have on the brush, so I do very light misting, then I dip it a little bit heavier to get a little bit bigger of a splatter, and then I would do a couple real big splatters with a really wet brush to give a really big streak. I like that so that there's some dimension and it's not just always the same type of splatter along the whole bike. So depending on how many colors you want to do this to basically your heart's content. I actually went back a few times and added some more of the blue and some of the purple and the pink, depending on areas that I felt needed a little bit of that color. So again, since this is an organic paint job, you can add as much and as little as you want. Once that's done, you want to let that paint completely dry. Then I did a little extra step, because I wanted a little bit of more depth in where the black was, is I sprayed it with a bluish green pearl, which again, you can find something similar like this in a rattle can. I did 1 coat of that all over the bike, let that dry, and then I put 2 coats of clear coat on there. Making sure again to look at your cans and let it dry for the recommended time that you have. Once that's done, you're done. I would recommend leaving the bike as is or on a bike stand for at least 24 hours to let the paint fully cure. I then would reassemble the bike, but don't ride it for another day unless you're gonna be riding on the road. You don't want the paint to be still somewhat soft, go ride in the dirt, and then a rock or something either chips it or gets embedded into the paint job. So I'd recommend leaving it for at least 2 days before you'd ride it off-road if this is a off-road bike. And that's it. Realistically, if you just break down those simple pieces and mask it and scuff it like I did all of this within 3 hours. And that's including dry times, because typically between coats it's a 10 to 15 minute dry. And I was extremely excited with the results. And if you want to keep your paint job nice, I would recommend covering it in some 3M Clear Bra. I'm going to be doing a video on new way I've kind of figured out how to do it with less bubbles. So make sure to turn notifications on so you can see that video when I produce it. I wrap this bike in all the high risk areas to basically have an extra layer of protection to keep this paint as flawless as possible for as long as possible. So I hope you guys liked that video. If you have any questions, please make sure to check the comments below. I also have my How to Paint Your Bicycle 1 and 2 video in the description. So if you want to watch basically how to strip your bike all the way down and repaint it from scratch, it's a little bit more in detail. But again, depending on what your goal is with your bike, you can do a awesome paint job in not a lot of time as long as you prep, and clean your frame extra well. That's what really matters with a good paint job. And that's it. You have a custom splatter paint job in a couple of hours that is going to be totally different than anything else you're going to see on the road. So make sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to this channel so you can see all the video content I put out weekly. And thanks for watching another episode of Locked In. Let's get